I will introduce them real quickly. Renee Thiele, who has done tons of stuff. We do a podcast together called The Creator Feed, which you guys should all subscribe to. And a bunch of other stuff. She's worked all over the place, now consulting, and actually creates an amazing show on YouTube about weird food. So, hi, Renee. John Canning, I've known for years. He was at Microsoft and then SAG, and it's like, and all this stuff. And now is AMD doing stuff with creators. So, John, it's awesome to have you here. Awesome. Ivan Zelikovic is the person who's traveled the furthest to get here. He came from Dubai. Ivan has built podcast studios and other studios and is actually one of the most famous people on television in Serbia, where he's from. So if you were from Serbia, you would be being like, you would ask for his autograph.
You're big in Serbia. Anyone in Serbia? From Serbia, no? Okay.
And then Philip Nelson, long history in the online video space. I used to call him the TriCaster Master because when I ran an online video network, he would come in and basically run the TriCaster for all of our live shows. If you heard of Dignation or others, he would do those. Was at New Tech for a long time and is now running his own company, Nelco Media, where he builds studios for people like the NBA and all kinds of other people. So, hi everyone, that's my introduction. Let's start off and talk a little bit about the difference between the TV studio and the creator studio. So I want to put this out, what is the difference between that NAB classic TV studio and what creators need? Philip, I want to start with you. You work with a lot of clients. A lot of them are traditional, but I know you also work with creators. How do you see that difference, if there is one?
The difference is blurring quickly as lighting gets more affordable and lower power requirements. In the big studios, they have dimmers, they used to have dimmers, and the big difference is just scale. The technology is very similar now, and everybody pretty much has the tools on a laptop and a small camera with some halfway decent lighting and a mic to make something look like broadcast television. So the need for $6 million studios, unless you're doing Thursday night football, isn't quite as necessary anymore.
By the way, I also should have said, does anybody know who Chris Angel is? Is that a person you guys all know? He's been working with Chris Angel for a while. Also, does the name Joe Rogan? I think he also works with Joe Rogan and builds their studios, right, Philip? Yeah.
Yes.
So he sort of straddles that. Okay, so Renee, you've built a lot of different studios over the years. You've worked in big and small businesses. Now you're doing your own thing. Talk about what you see as the difference between the just the traditional television studios and what creators use and need.
Yeah, I think there actually is a big difference between traditional TV studio setup and then what a independent creator would need. Because with a studio setup, you typically have a team that is making sure everything is going smoothly. You have someone who's behind the camera, you have talent that's in front of the camera, but with an independent creator, you are oftentimes the person who's in front of the camera and behind the camera. So the needs are a little bit different. And I think that when you're thinking about your setup as an individual creator, you want to make sure that there are not a lot of equipment in place. There are not a lot of points of failure because you were controlling everything yourself. And it's a good idea to be able to remotely control everything. Like in my setup, I can control my lights on an app on my phone. I can control my camera through an app on my phone. I can control my teleprompter through an app on my phone. So I can sit in one spot and control everything to make sure things look good. So there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the team you have in place. Oftentimes the budget and the size of the studio that you're working with is slightly different too, but the biggest difference is you are in front of and behind the camera at the same time.
Well, also there's another thing that I just quickly, and anybody, but Philip and Ivan, I'll start with you guys, I guess. If you guys ever moved a big television studio or a big studio from one place to another, how long did that take? Ivan, how long did that take?
It will take definitely months, but it's always a question of visibility and what is your business goal.
Okay, months. I just need a quick answer. Months, right? Months, right, Philip?
Yes.
And you moved from like one place to another, and how long did it take you to move your studio?
Well, I just moved it along with my house.
Right, with your house, but
But I had it set up. I was in my new place on Sunday, and we did a podcast on Wednesday. Everything was set up. So it took a few days.
We were supposed to do it Tuesday, but she was late. And she was unpacking everything else, too. Okay, so Ivan, for you, I think of creators as businesses and businesses as creators. Look, every creator, if they do it right, is going to be a business at some point. How do you see the business creator studio? Because you work a lot with businesses to set up podcast and digital video studios. How do you see that compared to the TV studio?
Exactly, Jim. What you're saying, it's all about the business goal you want to achieve. And what Rene was saying, the studio has to be very efficient. So you have to preset it, so you don't have to work a lot every time. We have companies that record themselves, only pressing a button, and that's it. Everything is preset. You know, companies cannot go with the user-generated content with a phone going around trembling and so on. So it has to be on that side, but on the other side, it has to be feasible. And on the other side, it has to have some business goal achieved. So that is the balance between the big TV studio and the creator studio that we were discussing.
And John, from your side, you know, SAG, where you worked with a lot of traditional actors and actresses and digital creators, and now at AMD, where you try and get chips and work with people who are building things like Adobe's products and other people. How do you see that studio and editing and background and all of that different from television to creators, or maybe you don't?
Look, it's funny, the word creator, and I find some folks call creators not professionals, and I have a real issue with that. It gets me angry, and I tend to say bad words. Creators run the gamut, and it really comes down to budget, creative, expertise, right? Like she's a creator. I don't even know what you're doing, but you're shooting, you're creating, right? All the way up to somebody who's working on VFX. And it's all a scale of what your tools are, what your budget is, what are you trying to create. And I think the accessibility, and some people will say democratization or whatever, but the accessibility of tools to everybody, that you can work at a pro level and be an individual, right? And it just is, it's a matter of scale at that point. Corey Strasberg, doing amazing things creating a series Blue, but he said, I'm doing everything. And if you look at it, I mean, top quality product. He produces an episode a month or two because it's him, right? He cannot, and he said, the problem is I've got a great series on YouTube that gets downrated because I can't put out enough content. And so the algorithm dings me. It's not the quality of his content, it's the speed of output, the amount that he can put out.
Makes sense. Anybody want to jump in on that before I move to the next topic?
I actually did want to jump in on that and say that there's lots of different types of creators. And when I was talking about kind of the independent creator and building out a studio, that's very different than if you think about like the Mr. Beasts of the world that have huge teams around them. And I think their setup is probably a little bit more similar to what you would get with traditional TV studios in some respects, because they have a larger team. And so there are lots of different types of creators and different types of creator teams.
But also when it comes to the studio, it's not only the equipment, it's also the processes. There are companies that have studios, that have rooms to do, let's say, whatever they need to do in media, but still, if they don't have some kind of processes or concept around how it is done, then they don't do anything. They hire the hired guns to film in their own studio. So there has to be some kind of process and system on how do you do videos. There's some kind of a governance of that studio and so on. So that's also the thing, because all you have to do, whatever you do in every studio, in every film, in front of any camera, is storytelling. Yep. You are not a cameraman, you are not a mixer, you are not an audio producer. You want that to be as automated as it can be. Here we have very efficient set with several people there doing amazing job with automated PTZ cameras around us, and that's it. But the point of this is not tech, it's story, what we are sharing.
I want to add something that for the creator all the way up to the big studio that a lot of people take for granted or don't really think about. It's your set. Camera technology has gotten to the point where affordable cameras look great. Mics, you don't have to have Electrosonics mics. You can have a good microphone that's affordable, but if it looks like bad dorm room video from YouTube, it erodes your credibility of your message. And having a good set isn't expensive. I mean, Ivan mentioned we have these PTZs here, but our set is pretty sick. This looks great. So all the video is going to look amazing. So good lights and good set, I think for the creator, is one of the more important things because the technology is now democratized.
So, Philip, put a pin in that because I want to talk about sets for each of the different types of creators.
Okay.
So, before that, though, and I want to talk a little bit about creators and different types and what's appropriate for them. We'll get into that. But first, I want to talk about for creators. We talk a lot here on stage this year about at Creator Square about live streaming, and a little bit about on demand and shooting. And I wonder, when you think about live versus on demand when it comes to creators, is there a difference? And if so, what is that difference? And Ivan, start.
The difference in health.
In health.
It's in health. It's in stress that you're getting. So that's the main thing.
John, go ahead.
When I was working at NBC, people would say we want to do something live, and I'm like, do you want to do it live or live? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I can make something feel live and have some delay and not be stressed. But if you want to do live, I'm going to double your budget. And they're like, what are you talking about? Because I'm like, well, I'm going to get backups of everything. We're going to be hot backups because live is live.
Okay, but that's NBC. What about for a creator who wants to go live? Philip?
Well, one of the things that, anybody can go buy a camera now and start shooting and editing. The great thing about live, from my perspective, is that you do it live and you're finished. We do a lot of studios for government public affairs. And usually they're understaffed. It's usually one on-camera person and maybe the PIO, the public affairs officer, and a video person. And so one of the things that we've really pushed is that live workflow. And as John mentioned, it could be live to drive. I'm going to just record it. It's an hour discussion. At the end of that hour, I'm finished. And I'm moving on to the 50 other things I need to do instead of taping a session and now going into post and spending a day or two editing it. So I'm a big fan of the live workflow because I feel like we all have a lot to do. We all have 20 million things that we also need to do to prep for whatever's tomorrow, and live allows you to be finished when that segment's over.
And what I was pointing out with like live, and is thinking about, do you need to be live? Even say individual creator live. Do you need to be live? Is there something you're doing that is going to demand? Is it immediate feedback from the audience? Is it a timely moment? Or can you stand for the screw up that you're going to go, oh, I need to reshoot that?
It's very authentic when you're live, though. Renee, go ahead. Talk about your
exactly.
Yeah, so I think live, no matter how you frame it and what it is that you're trying to do, is stressful. Just ask Netflix. They just went through a situation where they were trying to do a live version of Love is Blind, and it never aired because they had technical issues. It's Netflix. Like, they have a lot of budget. Like, live can be very, very challenging. You have to fix things in the moment. If you are an independent creator, you're going live on YouTube, there's still a lot of stress that can happen there. You have to moderate the questions that are coming in. You have to make sure that the technical stuff is going right. And then you also have to think about, are you bringing in guests? So it can be very challenging.
Well, so my experience when we did Tech TV, which is a cable network we launched,
back in the day.
But we put a bunch of geeks on TV for the first time, and we did most of our stuff live, because it was more expensive back then. But what I found was when you took somebody who was not camera ready, who wasn't a talent, when they went live, all of a sudden there was a little bit of tension that made it better. Yeah, sure, they screwed up, but it made it better. Real quickly on live, I want to let Ivan and Philip talk for a minute, then we're going to move on to the next question.
You're absolutely right. There is some kind of an adrenaline sitting in front of you and talking now. What will I say? Would it be right or not? But when we are filming Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, we are filming it as it is live, but we are filming also all 6 or 7 cameras that we are running live, so we can have a fillers, but we do not exceed the running time of the show, so it goes as it is live. Like Oscars, it's delayed or live or so on. So yeah, there are some solutions, but if you are a corporate, if you are thinking about going live, don't, because you're not the TV. You don't have the backups that John mentioned, backups of a backup of a backup.
Real quickly, Philip.
Or go.
I had a great thought, and you distracted me. You got me speechless. No, what I was going to say is, the other thing I like about live is I think your audience is more forgiving. If they know you're live, and they see you kind of thinking, or the guests, you stump them, you can cover it, and it makes it more real. And I think you engage your audience. And I know that this is not as true as it was 10 years ago, but I think a live show, you get more of an appointment audience. They feel like they need to be there to watch it at that moment.
And some of the platforms will actually say when you're live, they'll promote you. Like TikTok, if you're live on TikTok, it's like, oh, Jim's live now. And,
you want to be there at that moment.
Followers will go watch it. Let's move on just a little bit. Real quickly, I want to talk about when you're building a DIY studio for a creator. We have all these different video formats. We've got square, we've got wide, we've got tall. How do you think about managing that in a creator studio? Renee, what do you think about managing both the wide, the tall, the square? And are there easy ways to do that for the small creator? And are there things that scale?
Yeah, I think that if you are creating for various different types of aspect ratios, try to shoot in at least 4K so that when you trim it down, you're not, you don't have to crop anything that you wouldn't want to crop. So try to, if you're shooting horizontally, try to do it in 4K, and you can trim that down to a vertical video. But also pay attention to what's behind you. So make sure that if you really want something in your frame, when it's a vertical video, but you're shooting in horizontal, make sure you're actually going to get it. What's in the background in your vertical frame? So test it out in advance.
Put tape on your viewfinder. That's what we did from the SD to HD transition. So wide, tall. Any thoughts on that for creators and how to deal with that?
You summed it up. What I was shaking my head is to think who's driving 4K workflows, right? I'll go back to NBC for a second. We were having to deal with a 4K workflow to produce stuff for Snap before we were having to do it for television.
Right, yeah.
Right? And our guys were like, we don't actually have a 4K workflow, but they're demanding that because of these kinds of things. And I just think it's the push and pull is interesting. Dealing with the different aspect ratios is just a pain in the ass. Everybody puts cardboard on the monitor.
Yep. Ivan?
I think that social media platforms pushed us to the vertical. So they pushed us to do reels, to do TikTok posting and so on. And yes, then you need maybe more, or you just turn the camera and have a 4K, HD. It's easier, That's the post-production.
I have nothing to add to their statements.
So we talked about this a little at a panel yesterday, and someone saying, and I've seen this before, where they will see creators with a wide camera, like a Canon or something like that, but with a cell phone mounted on top on the hot shoe vertical, and they'll record both of them, which I think is really interesting. All right, we're going to move in and talk about types of creators and what they might want and get down and dirty into some gear. I hope that's okay with all of you, right? Talk about gear? We're going to talk about some gear. Okay, so let's talk about Sole Creator. And I really want to lightning through this. So first of all, required gear. Let's get into video first. Can you get by for a Sole Creator with just a mobile phone, or do you need a camera? And if so, what kind of camera? Who wants to start? Ivan.
Mobile phone.
Mobile phone. Philip.
Mobile phone or a Blackmagic pocket sit-on.
Blackmagic, but I want one of those. Will you sell me one, Philip? Yes, you will.
I will. Give you a discount.
If you're doing mobile phone, make sure you have a good audio solution.
Okay, we'll talk about audio in a minute. Video.
I have a mobile phone with me and good audio to connect to it, specifically to do videos while we're out. You can get away with it.
Okay, how many of you are Apple users? Pretty good. What's the best Apple is above? Anything above a 13, a 14?
If you're a content creator, then you shouldn't be an Apple user.
Okay.
How you will extract your videos? Yeah. How you extract your videos from iTunes and everything? Rather in other things, you just have
both. Hold up your Pixel. Hold up. I use the Pixel.
I have both.
I love my
both. Definitely.
Use Samsung or Apple today?
Both.
Both.
I have two.
All right, maybe you do both. Okay, cool. So what about lighting? What's our lighting solution for the beginning creator? Anybody?
Lighting to me is super critical, and you can get really cheap lights, but there's a brand, and I'm going to say this for every level.
Go ahead.
Rotolight.
Rotolight.
They're a light out of the UK, Pinewood Studios.
ROTO
light. They're somewhere down there, but they tie to a flash for a still photography sync. They do a great smooth LED pattern, because some of the cheaper LED lights, the LEDs are spread out too much, and you actually cast a pattern and it looks like garbage. So you don't have to go crazy, but get good lights.
Rotolight. Lighting?
In efficient solutions, there is only one thing to think about: soft lighting or hard lighting. do it soft. You can do it very easily if you bounce it to the floor or to the walls or to the ceiling, or you have some softbox or something like that. So think soft or hard. You know, like that's the only.
John.
I was thinking along those same lines. Experiment with your lighting. Get to understand how light works, right? So that you're not
Any resources where you can find that out?
Oh God, there's a ton in just traditional photography, video. Like you just go.
Make a nice photo.
Yeah.
There's 3 books in the NAB bookstore on lighting that are really good. And I have all
I
3.
can't remember the name of the title, but
I don't. There's 3 books. There's 3 books on lighting. Go buy one. But $50.
But experiment.
Renee, when we do our podcast, your lighting always looks amazing. And you're a sole creator in many ways. So what do you recommend on that side?
So I'm going to give 2 brands. One, I do have expensive LED lights and things like that when I'm doing higher quality production. But for my own content, Elgato for soft lights in front of me that are attached to my desk. And my desk is on wheels, so I can move it around. Lighting is on the desk. Excuse me. And then behind me, I use Philips Hue lights. And so with Philips Hue, I can do gradient lights, and I can easily change the look of my background by changing the colors.
Nice. Okay, cool. So let's talk about audio. Who started talking about audio? John, talk about audio.
In Adobe.
Talk about audio for a minute.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's having good audio is the key. You can have bad video and good audio and still have a good production. If you have bad audio and good video, you're pooched, right? Like, unless somebody's just great at lip reading. So having something that gives you good, clean audio is key. I've seen more video productions where somebody's shooting with a cell phone, they're way back here, and they're like, I got this. And I'm like, no, you don't.
Okay, so what are some brands or some mics that you think are good for the sole creator? Go ahead, Renee.
It depends on what you're doing. So for podcast mics, I like Shure microphones. There's a couple of different ones. Shure microphones for podcasts. For video content, it depends on if I am shooting with my phone or doing something in my home studio. On my phone, I really like...
The Rode?
It's not the Rode, but there is a Rode version of it.
Sorry, we'll move on. Think about it. We'll get back to you. What do you think, Ivan?
For podcasts, there is only one microphone, which is not the best, but it is the podcast microphone, which is Shure SM7B Mark II.
Yep.
There is
I'll differ.
C100,
I'll disagree with you a little bit. I think.
I know that there are better mics,
but there's a couple things that nobody's mentioned on that. Like, I use a Rode, which I really like, but do you go XLR or do you go USB?
No. You have to go XLR. You have to have a preamp for that.
Why?
Because
I know why. Just tell people why.
Tell why.
Why? Don't tell me. I don't.
No. Because you have to ignite the cardioid inside. You know, like
so XLR. You need like a little preamp.
A little bit preamp.
Okay, so what's the preamp that people should buy?
You have it in a Rodecaster or something. You know, like you don't. That's a pure technical. I really don't.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I have one at home too.
I have to be very honest. I'm using for my podcast. We were using Shure SM7B Mark II without preamp.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's a very hard for the post-production.
You also need a preamp, right?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, go.
I'm not going to name a preamp because there's so many, but a Shure SM7B is one of our go-tos for the podcast style. And believe it or not, on some projects, lavaliers are nice. I know Rob Chickering in the audience does Glenn Beck's Blaze TV. They did experiments with using lavalier mics on set, and they got a great sound out of it. But, you know, the cool thing is you don't have to spend $2,500 a mic. You know, Audio Technica has some really nice mics. We love Sennheiser. Sennheiser is kind of my go-to unless somebody's on a budget, and then I'll bop it down to Audio Technica. And then for the podcast, we use the Shure SM7Bs.
I'll just go back to, we talked about preamps. You know, a lot of folks started shooting with mobile phones or SLRs. SLRs traditionally are crap for audio.
Yep.
Nikon actually did a better job than Canon, but you use a preamp to have good, clean sound coming in, because a lot of folks will go native into a device and they have to crank up the gain, the noise floor comes up, and that's really hard to remove. It's getting better with the new tools, but sometimes crap in your host.
Yeah, no need to fix it if you don't need to. You know, let's start it off right so that you have a good sound out of the gate, and you're not fixing anything.
Renee,
I'm sorry, Renee.
So I wanted to say two more things about audio, and that's I did remember the name of the product, which is Ceramonic. So Ceramonic, Rode has something similar, but essentially with the Ceramonic, if you're shooting with your phone, they have a transmitter that you can connect directly into your phone, and then you can use a wireless lav that way, and it's actually pretty clean audio. But if you mess up with your audio, there are some Gen AI solutions that will help fix your audio. Like is Descript, and then also Adobe has a product called Adobe Podcaster that can also fix your audio.
that cleans your audio. It's amazing what it does. I will totally agree with you on that. It can make something like in a noisy environment like this where everyone's talking, you put it in, all of a sudden you sound like Philip.
Or John.
Higher than that, John.
Or you sound like Ivan or something. All right.
Yeah, I know.
Any last thoughts on audio? Because we could obviously talk about audio for a long time.
No, because it is really, really
It's
important.
very important.
And do you know why the mirror videos are very popular with creators? Because the sound is very good. They keep the phone here and they record the mirror. And what gives you, there are some strolling reporters, you know, they are using the second phone. Also, phones have a good microphones. The speakers with the phones are not that good, but the phone and the whatever transmitter, whatever. But the microphones are quite good, so you can use it with the Adobe Adobe Podcast. It's a free tool,
It's free, yes.
which is amazing. Whatever John just said now, it's amazing.
Any last thoughts on audio before we move on?
It's very important, as John said.
Okay, it's all we know. It's
It's very
important. Thank you, Philip. Let's talk about sets for a minute. Philip already talked about sets, but I'm interested in how you guys think about sets. Renee, I want to start with you and how you think about your set and what's behind it, and think about it for an entry-level creator.
Yeah, so I do different types of videos. Sometimes I want my background to look more professional. Sometimes I want it to look a little bit more fun. As Jim mentioned, I do weird food videos, and so I want to make sure that there's kind of a fun background to it. So fundamentally, I think that you need to make sure your background matches the tone that you want your video to take. So think about if it's really fun or if it's more of a business audience that you're kind of going towards. And so I like to have a background that you can play with a little bit, so there's some variety. So I mentioned that I use the Philips Hue lights behind me. I can change the lighting to match the brand of the company that I'm creating a video for. So that's the first thing. Make sure you have a lot of variety.
John, sets?
Again, it comes back to budget, creative ambition. I did a whole, back in the day, I guess it would be called a podcast now, interviewing in the home, and we literally just changed different locations in the home. You know, again, we were doing depth of field, so we were fuzzing it out, playing with lighting, but we were just, I literally shot like 6 different locations just by doing this. You know, and giving a different feel to it to look, you know, not so static. You can play with that. This stuff that you're seeing, the LED wall, like that's another set option. The virtual set, the set extensions that you can do in simple graphics packages these days. You can find stuff where you're literally doing digital set extensions. So it all depends on your creative ambitions, your budget. There are a lot of interesting options now.
But all are not outside of the realm of possibility for even some of the smaller creators. Ivan, go ahead.
Yes, just a few simple tips. Don't be stuck to the wall. So try to go as far as you can out of the wall. Please just don't have shadows on the wall. That's it. That's the one thing that you should not have. And if you can achieve depth of field, that would be perfect. So depending on the lens you have, depending on the camera you have, but try to be as much in the front and obviously don't have a source of light behind you. That's for the backlight.
For sets, to me, the set determines the tone of your show. You know, and I think a lot more effort needs to be placed by, especially by DIY, to determine what am I trying to convey, how do I want to come across, and your set either supports that or destroys that. And so, you know, John was on the panel yesterday focusing on the creative, and that's where the set comes in. It's like, what am I trying to say? You know, if it's a government official, you want something a little more official and polished. If it's a gamer, they can go with a green screen and put
food videos.
Yeah, I mean, so rather than talk about just the technical side of the studio, it's really locked down the look and feel that you want, and it doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, I see a lot of geek culture podcasters where their set is an IKEA box shelf filled with Marvel Legends figures and took pictures of Totoro, you know, and it supports their brand. But you wouldn't use that same set if you're covering tech.
Ivan, real quick.
This is why we sound so cool, because we have a so cool set.
Yep.
So yeah, thank you guys for making it happen.
Okay, one last thing on set, Renee. Did you want to add anything?
I don't really have anything to add.
You don't have to,
other than
we'll move on.
I have one
I just went to you because you look like you had
He's such a good moderator. He's
we do a
wrangling
podcast
cats.
together, so I always like, Renee, you must have something to add.
I do have one tip, and so I think what Ivan said is actually very important for creators. Don't be right next to the wall and have shadows behind you. A really easy way to get rid of that shadow, put a light behind you that no one can see, that you're standing directly in front of it and it's pointed at the wall. That's going to help with your shadows.
And one last thing about sets. So we've talked about audio, we talked about cameras, we talked about all those things. Where you shoot can impact all those other decisions, right? So set, location will also impact, right? Like the cell phone is great, but we started talking about depth, you know, new cameras can depth of field, audio, like that can be impacted by all where you shoot, how much room you have to shoot. Like, God help you with these things. These things are horrible for audio because they're hard, flat surfaces that bounce sound around 9 ways from Sunday, right? Like, again, set will also impact, set and creative will impact all those other decisions we were talking about.
Philip wants to say something really quickly.
Really?
Accent lights are very helpful.
Accent.
You know, everybody thinks I'm lighting my talent, and you mentioned it with the Philips lights, but believe it or not, those accent lights, just a little splash of light on the wall, some color on the wall is going to make you pop in the video, and it really is a big differentiator from something that looks professional and amateur.
Okay, wait, I have something. I want to move on really quickly, but I want to tell you guys we have 5 minutes left.
Ooh.
I will come. Yeah, you know what? I had like 20 pages of stuff. We've gotten through 6.
Stick around, we're going to be here all day.
These guys are awesome. What we're going to do after this is these guys will move over there. You see where that stuff is, and we can ask questions. 15 minutes after 11, is it 11:15, right? 11:15, whatever's going on over there, we're going to turn it into a workshop and a roundtable about generative AI. So Renee and Ivan and I and Robin, who's here somewhere, are going to sit there and we're going to talk about Gen AI, but it's going to be a workshop. We want to work with all of you because there's so much to talk about Gen AI for creators as well, which we're not even going to touch about here. But real quickly for you guys, and I want to go out and ask at least one question out here. What changes if you're a bigger creator? Maybe not at the Mr. Beast level, but let's say you've got 8 or 10 people working for you or 4 or 5. What changes as you grow up to that level beyond what we've already talked about? Who wants to start? Ivan.
We have to realize that for a decade, Mr. Beast was a small creator. For a decade. And when you spend a decade working on it, you easily become a big creator. You know what you want to do, you want what you prove. His videos still have appeal of a small creator, no matter their big scale videos. 4.5 million for a Squid Game redoing cost, and then you see him jumping around like in any video that he did 10 years ago. So my suggestion would be whatever you do, just start.
Right. Okay, so for bigger creators, Philip, what do you say and what's different, if anything?
You know, as you transition, it's your workflow. You know, people get into the habit of just doing it all themselves. And in order to scale, you've got to design a good workflow for your content, your producing the show, your guests, if you have guests, and letting your team do their jobs. Because as a creator, you're like, I can do this. I've done it for years, and you just have to change that mentality to think about a scalable workflow so that you can get more done. And if you're the on-camera talent, you're letting your team do their thing, and you're trusting your team. And that's really hard for some of these DIY creators to make that switch.
Are we all going to sing "Let It Go" now?
No,
Please don't.
Go ahead.
I just want you to sing it, Jim.
I want to sing "Let It Go." No, I think that's. I was thinking the same exact thing, which is You bring more team, I'm going to go faster, we're going to create more. No, not unless you've got a coordinated workflow, you've got that ability to collaborate, right? I've seen any number of teams now starting to spring up where they're geographically disparate, and the tools are amazing. Like, you don't need to be co-located to your editor necessarily, or your audio mixer. But how do you collaborate? How do you work together? And I think that's what's interesting around the software tools, is that's becoming much more accessible.
Renee?
The more people that you get involved and the more tools that you get involved, the more complexity there is. And so it can definitely slow down the process. One thing I would recommend is that when you are scaling, you may want to introduce more cameras. And so as a solo creator, you can have multiple cameras. It's just as really complicated for one person to control all of that. But if you have multiple cameras, it could potentially make the edit a little bit easier. Because it's easier to edit something out if you can switch to a different angle. And so, yeah, you need a team to be able to support a workflow that really has those multiple cases.
Ivan, go ahead. You know you're going to do it anyway.
Delegate as soon as possible. It's very hard for the creators to delegate, but delegate as soon as possible, and it doesn't happen in instant. Oh, I got an editor, okay, edit now. No, you have to work together for months, if not years, for him to be able to replace you and your creativity in your own language, let's say, and expression. So yeah, that's it.
Cool.
Delegate as soon as possible.
Questions out here? Anybody have a quick question I can go to? Somebody must have a mic. You can, all right, I'm running. Make it me.
He has a mic and he knows how to use it.
I'm 92 years old, and I've never been employed. I've never had the quality for anyone to want to hire me, so I've always hired people to do my work for me in the ownership of my radio stations. Now I'm on YouTube in retirement, and I'm puzzled by some of the YouTubes that are 20, 30 minutes long as over against those that are 2 or 3 minutes long. My YouTube presentations are brief on purpose. Am I wrong? Have there been studies on this?
I would say, no, you're not wrong, because if you're engaging an audience and the analytics show that you're actually delivering value and people are watching. But I would also say maybe you'd be better on TikTok. Renee, what would you say? You've worked with tons of creators at TubeBuddy and other places.
Yeah, in terms of length, never make it longer than it needs to be, and never make it short for the sake of it being short. Like, take the time that you need to say. And I know that that's like a non-answer, but it really is the answer. Like, if people are watching your content all the way through, you're doing something right, and you can experiment with longer content and see if they continue watching. And if you're creating long-form content and they're dropping off within 2 minutes, you might want to make your videos 2 minutes or 60 seconds.
Joe Rogan is a prime example. You know, he's not doing snippet videos. His interviews can be hours long, and he's getting insane engagement, but it's an appropriate length for the topic.
Wait a minute, you have a follow-on?
Oh, sorry.
Run, Jim, run.
Everything that's been said thus far is very relevant, but my question is, has this been scientifically researched as to audience retention?
Yeah. I mean, and what she said is exactly the right answer. And YouTube is a distribution platform, right? They're actually, you can watch mainstream television on YouTube. So the answer is yes, people do watch it longer, right? It is a distribution platform. I've gotten that question, is how long my content should be. Long enough to be interesting and fill the topic, short enough to keep their attention, right? And, you said maybe TikTok. It depends also a bit on audience reach. YouTube is kind of crazy ubiquitous. TikTok, more specific kind of audience, but it also depends on the kind of content you're producing. But again, there's been a lot of this research. The analytics of drop-off, right? I said, what's the old 10 seconds to figure out that it's going to make my eyes bleed? The YouTube analytics, about 10 seconds in, you can see drop off on certain videos. That's because people went, holy shit, what's this? As opposed to the lean in, I'm going to go watch an hour of something because it's episodic, I'm interested, it's engaging.
All right, and Renee, go ahead, and then we're going to cut it off and move over there.
There's a reason that the platforms are experimenting with different types of content. And so YouTube primarily was kind of thought of as like more longer form content, and now they have shorts. TikTok was primarily thought about as short form content, and now they're experimenting with long form content. There's different types of audiences that each of those types of contents can serve.
Exactly. And that's all the time we have for this. We're going to move over there. Those of you who can move over there. Thank you very much. John Canning, Philip Nelson, Renee Thiele, and Ivan Zelikovic. And thank you all for being part of this. Thanks for NAB. Thank you for Creator Squared and all the team. Robin, Gigi, and Chona. Oh yeah, we're going to take a photo first before we get over there. And leave your mics.